Hi everyone. We're now going to be moving on to examples that involve interacting with files. Now the first thing that you need to know before you dive into these examples is that you cannot run this in the browser. It can only be run from your computer because it's going to be accessing files in your local hard drive. So the first thing we're going to do is click on sample files, and this will essentially download a bunch of files which are going to be the example files we use. Now, what this will do is give you a folder, which, when you unpack it, which will be on your desktop. So if I go to my desktop, I put it on my desktop. So I have sample files. Now, what you want to do is make sure that the code that you're running is going to be in the same directory as sample files. So I'm going to be running this file, recursion2, and it's in the same directory, the desktop, as sample files. So that's why this is going to work. If you have any errors where it cannot find sample files, make sure that your code is running in the same directory. Now, the reason that we do recursion when we interact with our file system is because it's a very naturally recursive problem. If you think about it, let's say that I wanted to print out all the files in a given folder. Now, if I can get all the files in that folder, then I can simply print it out. However, what if another file in that folder is actually another folder? So for instance, if I go to sample files, if I wanted to print out everything in here, I could print out mirror.txt and emergency.txt, but then I have to go inside to folder A and essentially print out everything in folder A. But then I'd have to go inside folder C and folder D and then go into folder E. So essentially, as you can see, if we want to actually print out the files, it's a lot harder because essentially what we're doing is printing out all the files in sample files and then asking it to print out all the files in folder A as well as all the files in folder B. So naturally, this is a recursive problem. Now the first thing you want to do when you do file system problems is import OS. Now OS is this module in Python that allows us to interact with our operating system. So let's first think about the way that we're going to print the files. So def print files. So print files is going to take in a path, which is going to be initially the name of the folder, but then as we go deeper and deeper, we'll be adding on folders to go into. Now I have my base case and I have my recursive case. Now in file recursion, there's always two cases. Either I'm looking at a file or I'm looking at a folder. Now if we're looking at a file, this is essentially the base case, because this means that we can't recurse deeper anymore. However, if I'm looking at a folder, then this is my recursive case. So I'm going to say looking at a file equals base case, and then looking at a folder equals the recursive case. So in order to check if I'm looking at a file, there's a operating system method called os.path.isdir. And it basically returns true if it is a directory and false if it's not. So if this returns false, this means that the path we're looking at is a file, so go into the base case. Otherwise, it means it's a folder, so go into the recursive case. Now let's think about what we want to do in the base case, because the base case and the recursive case, no matter what, should be doing the same thing, essentially, printing out the files. So if I want to print the files in a given file, and I know it's not a folder, then simply I just print the path, because this is the only file that I need to print. Now if I'm looking at a folder, then I essentially need to loop through everything in that folder and then print everything in there. So if we want to find all the different directories inside of or all the different things inside of a folder, we can do os.listdir on the path. This will return a list of all the different file names. So I'm going to do for file name in os.listdir. Now, let's look at the example of sample files again. Oops. If I go to sample files, os.listdir on sample files would give me mirror.txt, folder B, folder A, and emergency.txt. Now I need to actually do sample files / folder A to recurse into it. So I'm going to say new path is equal to the old path plus os.sep, or actually plus a slash plus the file name. So this would essentially be something like sample files slash folder A. Now, I have this new path, and so all I need to do is now print the files in this new path. So I just make a recursive call, and think about the different cases. If this new path is a file, it'll immediately return the base case and print. But if it's a folder, then it'll repeat the process and loop through everything in that folder. And in this way, by handling the case where it's a file and handling the case where it's a folder, we can essentially recursively print all the files. So if I now call print files on sample files, it prints out everything inside of here, which is exactly what we wanted.